Today we're out here in sunny Southern California taking a look at the all-new 2019 Toyota Avalon. This is Toyota's largest sedan under the Toyota brand in the United States. Think of the Avalon as the bigger and more comfortable cousin to the Toyota Camry. We get more room on the inside, we get a slightly larger trunk in the back, but we have about the same kind of power under the hood. The model we're looking at in this video is the Avalon V6, and this particular one is the new top-end touring trim. If you want to know more about the Avalon Hybrid, which was also completely redesigned for 2019, there's a separate video on my channel that goes into great detail on that model. All Avalon models get full LED headlamps, although the headlamps do change depending on the trim that you get. Since we're driving the top-end trim, we have the fanciest headlamps, which have these very interesting projector modules inside, daytime running lamp strips in sort of little J patterns. These headlamps also feature a progressive turn signal, as you can see right there. What's going on is this center section actually blinks and then the outside is progressive. That's because of some of the wacky headlamp laws we have in the United States where a certain portion has to blink. You can't have the entire thing be a progressive lamp. At 195.9 inches long, the Avalon is about 3 to 4 inches longer than the average mid-size sedan in America. That gives us more legroom in the back than something like a Toyota Camry. But the Avalon is not as large as some full-size sedans in America, so this is going to be shorter than some of those options. That's why we find rear legroom that is actually quite similar to the 2018 Honda Accord, although again, more than what we find in the Toyota Camry. Now, although rear legroom is quite similar to the Accord, one of the reasons you might want this over the Accord is for rear seat headroom. Out back, we find very similar progressive tail lamp modules, and yet again, due to regulations in North America, the balance is switched. So the progressive section is here on the inside, and the flashing section is out here on the outside. This all has to do with the way that tail lamp and headlamp laws work in America. The red plastic strip helps tie the two tail lamp modules together, and these turn down on each side like that. They're very 3D. They stick out quite a lot from the body, quite a lot of styling going on there. We have quad exhaust tips down at the bottom. Now we have two little mufflers on each side of that, but it does Y out right at the end to those quad tips. Some people have accused these of being completely faux quad exhaust tips, but they are actually functional. What's going on here is that the outboard exhaust tip right here Ys into the inboard exhaust tip. So most of the exhaust gases obviously flow through this one right here, but some do come out of the outboard one, just not a great deal. Be sure and let me know what you think about the Avalon's grille down there in the comments section below. There are two different grille designs depending on whether you're getting the sportier XSE or touring trim, or whether you're getting the more luxurious XLE or limited trim. The limited trim has the horizontal slats that you see over here. Under this hood, we find basically the same drivetrain options that we see in the 2018 Camry. Things start out with a 3.5-liter V6, which is what we're looking at right here, that produces 301 horsepower and 267 pound-feet of torque. It sends power to the front wheels only via an 8-speed automatic transmission. Even though power is up 33 horsepower over last year's 3.5-liter V6, fuel economy improves by either 1 or 2 miles per gallon to 25 or 26, depending on exactly which options you've selected. If that's not enough fuel economy for you, you can trade power for fuel economy with the optional 2.5-liter hybrid system. That gives you 215 horsepower combined, but up to 44 miles per gallon combined. Again, if you want to know more about that hybrid model, you can click on over to that video. Front seat comfort is fairly good in the Avalon. The model that we're driving has the 4-way adjustable lumbar support. 2-way adjustable lumbar support is standard, and in this particular model, the passenger seat has the same range of motion as the driver. We also have an electric tilt telescopic steering column that is memory linked with the 2-position memory over there on the door. Now, the Avalon is not quite as large as some of its competitors, because you could compare this to something like a Buick LaCrosse or perhaps a Chevy Impala. In this particular segment, I think the LaCrosse's seats and perhaps the Nissan Maxima's seats are a little bit more comfortable than this, but it's a pretty close call. The Kia Cadenza has a more adjustable driver's seat with an extending thigh cushion, and we don't see that in the Avalon. Rear seat comfort is another reason that you might want to get the Avalon over the average mid-size sedan in America. We definitely have a generous amount of legroom back here. I have 6 inches of legroom approximately, with this front seat adjusted for me at 6 feet tall. Because of the way the dashboard is shaped, when I had a taller person in the cabin, they actually ended up moving the seat a little further forward, but even if the seat was all the way back in its tracks, I would still have several inches of legroom left. Now, unfortunately, even in the Avalon, we don't have as much headroom as I would like. If I sit upright in this back seat, my head does touch the ceiling. However, I don't have to crane my head to one side as you do in many mid-size sedans if you're my height in the back. In terms of overall headroom, the Avalon is actually quite similar to the current generation Camry, which is among the best in the mid-size sedan category. The big difference is that we get more legroom in the Avalon versus the Camry. Rear seat passengers get a fold-down armrest with 2 cup holders, and we do have 60/40 folding rear seat backs. The seats are a little bit higher than the cargo area in the back, but again, because the battery pack in the hybrid model is below the seat, the actual cargo opening does not change if you opt for that model. As you'd expect out of a bigger vehicle, we have a bigger trunk back here. You'll find 16 cubic feet of storage space whether you get the regular model or the hybrid trim. That's 1 to 2 cubic feet more than what we find in the Toyota Camry. And in case you're wondering, under that cargo area load floor, you do find a temporary spare tire. In my estimation, the actual bag capacity in this trunk is likely going to be basically the same as the Camry, however, but 1 to 2 cubic feet more means you should be able to fit more smaller bags in there with those large roller bags. Let's take a quick look around the interior. For this look, we are inside a limited trim model, so that means we do have the leather upholstery and the real wood trim. Our model also has this large sunroof right there. It is a standard sunroof, not a panoramic style, however, so it doesn't extend to the rear passenger seats. The front seats also have 2-way adjustable headrests, and this leather has quite an interesting pattern on it. If I zoom in, you'll see that it is perforated leather because these seats are both heated and ventilated, but very deliberately the perforation is not a regular pattern. It's more of a randomized pattern. One of the really big changes for this generation of the Avalon is a serious attention to detail on the interior. We also saw this to a limited extent in the new Camry, but it's been taken to a new level for the Avalon. We have a lot more stitching detail going on there on the bolsters for the side and the bottom cushions. And then if we move on over to the door, we find a more extensive use of soft touch plastics and of course more of that stitched leather right there on that door's center panel. At the front of the front doors and of course on the dashboard we find real wood trim. As far as I know, this is a first for a Toyota badged vehicle in America other than the Land Cruiser. The Land Cruiser has offered wood trim for some time. We also have a lot of stitch materials going on the dashboard. The upper section is an injection molded part, but then this lower section is stitched just like the doors. Below that stitch section, we find a slot-style glove compartment. This does not appear to be quite large enough for a large tablet computer, although smaller ones might fit. On the A-pillars, we have some JBL tweeters. The Avalon now offers one of Toyota's most powerful audio systems. If we move on over to the upper section of the dashboard, you'll notice this is all sort of a perforated material to give it more of a clean look right there by the defogger vent, and of course that interface between that and the rest of the dashboard. Between this and the previous generation Avalon, the center console is a pretty big departure. Instead of simply perching the infotainment screen on top of the dashboard, sort of like a tablet computer grafted into it, they've actually made it part of this center console. So you can see this actually swoops up here from this horizontal section, curves, and then turns into this infotainment screen that is mounted at the top. But of course, the really big change is that Apple CarPlay is now found in this Entune system. For a long time, Toyota had been really resisting putting modern smartphone integration into their infotainment systems, but that's different for the new Entune 3 system that we find not only in the Avalon, but also in the upcoming Corolla hatchback and the Toyota RAV4. Now it's worth noting that Apple CarPlay is offered, but Android Auto is not at this time. This change basically means that all Avalons will have navigation as long as you have a compatible smartphone. Of course, since this is Toyota, they offer multiple ways of navigating around. We can also use the factory navigation built into the system. Ours does have that option. And there's also a different smartphone-based navigation system that we've seen in some of their models before. The model that we're driving also has Toyota's latest 360-degree camera system. So right now you're seeing a bird's eye view. If I put it into drive, it changes a little bit. We get an eccentric front view along with the bird's eye view over there on the right side. If I put it in reverse, we get basically the same thing, only with the back camera. We do have active lines there, so on each side you can tell exactly how your wheels and the corner of the vehicle are going to turn if you're making that turn. You can turn those lines on and off with that button right there. Continuing down the center stack, we then find 2 large air vents and then the controls for the dual zone automatic climate control system. There's an auto button right over here. Then you'll find the controls for the heated and ventilated seats in this button bank as well. Below the climate controls, we find a storage cubby where you could keep your smartphone or other small items, and you can actually slide this back like that, and then under there we find a fairly large storage compartment with a wireless charging mat, so you can charge compatible wireless phones. Between the front seats, we have a padded center armrest with, again, more of that stitching going on. There's a button to release it here, and this reveals a moderately sized storage compartment. We have one tier up here that is removable, where you can put things like your key, your smartphone, that sort of thing. And then we have a deeper well where we have some water bottles and that sort of thing going on. This storage compartment is where we find the auxiliary input, USB input for the infotainment system, and then 2 charge-only USB ports. Only one USB port can be used by a media device in this particular system. The instrument cluster is one of Toyota's latest designs. We have a physical tachometer on the left and a physical speedometer on the right. Then just about everything else is being delivered by the multifunction display between those two. This is also one of Toyota's latest designs. The sections are displayed by little icons over here on the left, and then you toggle the button on the steering wheel left to right for the various options. For instance, our eco indicator, digital speed, fuel economy, etc. The status of the active driving support systems. The media device interface pulls information even when you're operating with Apple CarPlay. We then have an option for tire pressure and, of course, system status of some of the vehicle systems. You can adjust the way that some of the safety systems behave on this particular menu. Then we get vehicle warnings below. This is also where you'll find the outside temperature and, of course, the gear that the transmission is in, whether it's park or drive, right like that. The overall steering wheel design is very similar to some of Toyota's most recent products. We have perforated leather sections on each side and then regular leather on the bottom and the top in kind of this interesting contrast. Keep in mind, again, we are in the limited trim. The steering wheel changes just a little bit depending on the trim that you're looking at. Infotainment controls are split left and right. We have volume up, down, and voice command on the left, mode and track forward, backward on the right. Instead of having a stalk on the back of the steering wheel like we see in other Toyota models, the cruise control buttons are now right here on the front. We have our distance button right there, lane keeping assistance. Keep in mind, of course, that all Avalon models come standard with radar adaptive cruise control. And then on the left side of the steering wheel, we have the buttons that control that multifunction display, along with the phone button. Out on the road, the Avalon certainly drives like a slightly larger Camry, and that's actually a good thing for this generation of the Avalon, because the Camry in its last generation actually became one of the best handling vehicles in its particular segment. That hasn't always been the case with the Avalon and the Camry, of course, but with the latest generation of Camry and Avalon, Toyota has really decided to push handling ability as well as performance. Because we get basically the same V6 engine and same 8-speed automatic transmission under the hood, I expect performance to be very, very similar to the Camry in terms of acceleration. The Camry ran from 0 to 60 in 5.7 seconds. This is just 130 pounds heavier, so I expect this is going to come in right around 5.8. Of course, we haven't had the opportunity to test this on our usual test track, so be sure and stay tuned for when we can get this at home and run it through our usual battery of tests. One of the big differences between the Camry and the Accord, of course, is that we have an adaptive suspension available in the Avalon, and that does change the way this vehicle operates out on the road. We have the ability to change between 3 different drive modes. We have normal, we have sport, and then sport plus. And then you can mix and match some of the settings that those 3 modes change in a new custom mode. So you can choose, for instance, a firm suspension setting with the less aggressive throttle response. Right now I have this vehicle in Sport Plus, and it definitely becomes firmer than the Camry. It also becomes firmer than any other Avalon has ever been. I don't find this particular mode uncomfortably firm, but it is definitely firm for a daily driver. In terms of braking scores, because this top-end trim weighs only 130 pounds more than the Camry, but we actually seem to have more aggressive tires on it, I expect that the 60 to 0 stopping distance is actually going to be right about the same as the Camry. Now, depending on the version of the Avalon that you get, it may weigh about the same or just a little bit more than the Camry, so stopping distances could be very similar. The top-end trim of the Avalon is the heaviest, of course, so depending on exactly how you've equipped the Avalon or the Camry, the weight actually could get closer than that 130-pound mark. That's why when it comes to overall handling, the two vehicles are very close. Although because of the adaptive suspension and the tires that we find on this top-end touring trim, I suspect this will beat comparable models of the Camry. This is also likely going to hold its own against something like the Accord. It may sound weird to compare the Avalon with the Accord, but one of the reasons that we see features like an adaptive suspension available in the Accord and its very generous rear seat is that Honda does not have a direct competitor to the Avalon. So in many ways, the Accord competes with both the Camry and the Avalon on the Toyota side. So I think it's definitely a valid comparison to pit this against the top-end trims of that Honda. In terms of overall handling ability, I think this definitely beats the current generation Kia Cadenza. We no longer have an Azera from Hyundai to compete with this. They've actually decided to cancel that in favor of their latest Genesis models. And it appears that Ford is going to be canceling the Taurus soon. The Taurus is the oldest model in this group. It definitely feels old out on the road compared to this. It feels larger, it feels heavier, it doesn't feel as sporty. Although we do get that available SHO trim, which has an awful lot more power, but the rest of the Ford Taurus lineup, which is more the competitor for the Avalon, definitely feels behind the times. We also have something like the Buick LaCrosse. The Buick LaCrosse is also getting a little bit old, but it does handle very well. You can also get available all-wheel drive in that model. That's something that we don't find in the Avalon, of course. In terms of overall steering feel, the Avalon is very similar to the competition. That's because just about everybody is using an electric power steering rack, and there's not a lot of feedback coming from those front tires back into the steering wheel. But the steering is relatively quick and accurate, and it's just about as easy to tell what's going on up front as any of the competition. As long as you're driving the Avalon fairly gently, the cabin is fairly quiet, quieter than the Camry in my opinion. However, if you start driving this vehicle a little bit more aggressively, you'll definitely notice more engine noise come into the cabin. But not all of that engine noise is real, because this vehicle does use a combination of tricks in order to amplify the sound going on. We of course get a different tuned exhaust in the Touring model, and we get what they call a sound tube on the intake of the engine. That helps direct some of that intake sound and snarl into the cabin deliberately, but we also get some digital engine noise piped through the car's speaker system. Toyota tells us that the sound that comes out of the speakers is based on this same engine. So what they do is they actually record the engine in a studio, they digitize it, they package it, program it with the software, and then play it back through the speaker system. I'm not the biggest fan of digitally augmented engine noises, but at least Toyota is not trying to play a V8 soundtrack with a V6 engine like we do see in certain Ford products. It's a little bit difficult to talk about fuel economy when I haven't been driving this on my regular daily commute. We've been averaging about 16.5 miles per gallon out here in Southern California. It has been warm, and of course we have been driving this car pretty hard out here on these winding mountain roads. Based on our experience with the same engine and same transmission in the Camry, I expect that this engine is likely going to live up to its EPA fuel estimates, however. In terms of overall fuel economy, that should put this behind the average mid-size sedan in America, but ahead of most of the full-size competitions. This is going to be more efficient than a Taurus or a LaCrosse or an Impala or even Kia's Cadenza that also uses an 8-speed automatic. Overall, out on the road, this is exactly what I expected from the Avalon. The new Camry really raised the bar for Toyota, and the Avalon benefits from everything that was going on with that new Camry model. Obviously, this is a little bit bigger, so it's going to drive a little bit differently than the Camry. But if you want something that feels a little bit sportier, we do have that available adaptive suspension. So, well, in some situations, it may feel a little bit bigger. In other situations, if you get this Touring model, it'll actually feel a little bit more engaging than that Camry. For 2019, the Avalon starts at $35,500, and that gets you the XLE trim. The model that we've been driving most of the day today is the Touring model. This comes in at $42,200, and it's basically the top-end Avalon. As you can see, there's actually a relatively small spread between the base Avalon and the top-end trim. That's of course because Toyota considers the Avalon not just their largest sedan in America, but also the range-topping sedan. So if, for instance, you compare this to the Toyota Camry goes up to the XLE trim, and that's where the Avalon starts off and then goes on up to the next level. If you want the hybrid drivetrain, that's an extra $1,000 more, but you can't get it in the Touring trim, which is again this one right in front of me. For those watching their price tags, this is more expensive than the outgoing Avalon, and it's about $3,000 more expensive than a Kia Cadenza. But we actually get more standard equipment inside this cabin and in the vehicle generally than we find in the Kia. Now, interestingly enough, the Kia actually goes on up to be more expensive than the Avalon here as well. It will end at $44,600, but we actually find a few things on that Cadenza that we don't find on the Avalon at any price. Some of the omissions that we definitely don't find on the Avalon are a panoramic moonroof. We just have that standard moonroof that I showed you earlier. We also don't find an extending thigh cushion in this model either. Now, that's of course because Toyota has Lexus. So if you are looking for a more comfortable interior or some of those fancier features, you can just go to the Lexus dealer and buy a Lexus instead of the Avalon. But Kia doesn't have a luxury brand, so they have to jam all those features into their more mainstream cars. Obviously, you'll have to wait until we can get our hands on an Avalon for a full week so we can do our usual rundown of tests and comparisons. But at the moment, I can safely say that if you're shopping for a mid-size sedan in America and you want something that's a little bit larger and a little bit more comfortable on the inside, especially something with a larger trunk in the back, definitely put the Avalon on your shopping list. In addition to that, if you're looking for something that's less expensive than options in the near luxury segment, so less expensive than something like an Acura TLX, then again, this is going to be an excellent option for you. We don't yet know what the new Lexus ES will be like, but it's likely that it's going to be more expensive than the current generation ES. So it's likely that Toyota and Lexus are going to choose to put more distance between the Avalon and that Lexus. So if the Lexus price tag is already a little bit high for you, again, take a look at the Avalon instead. Be sure and let me know what you think about the Avalon down there in the comment section below, and stay tuned for our complete review. You can also find us over at facebook.com/AlexNautos, and if you want to support this channel, and I hope you do, click on up there at the top of your screen. You'll be taken over to patreon.com where you can support us there. I'll see you next week.